Ritchie, and with me here in the studio is Glenn Taylor, who's running for the leadership of the Alberta Party. Before we begin the interview, I'd like you to meet the people behind the scenes who are indispensable to the making of this program. Once in a while, I do need to talk to them, even as we are live on air. So without much ado, tech-savvy Evan Adnam, sorry, I stumbled on that, who's deeply rooted in the technical nitty-gritties of this program. Derek Bradley, his ears buzzing with social media hum, and Walter Schwabe, our executive producer. And there is Maria Jose, who's our project manager. So moving on to our conversation with our special guests, thank you so much for coming in here, Ms. Taylor. You are seeking leadership of the as yet shrouded by mist Alberta Party.
Yes.
What is it all about? What is the party all about?
Well, the party is all about affecting change and doing governance and doing politics differently here in Alberta.
Right.
There is a sense that Albertans are ready for change. And even our currently governing party, the Progressive Conservative Party, are split while they're trying to find where Alberta is going and catch up. And I believe that the Alberta Party is leading that change, and it is the change that Alberta is looking for.
Now, when you talk of change, what exactly do you mean by the word change? Is it just a different party? Why do we need a different party, first and foremost?
Well, I believe, first off, that the province of Alberta has changed. That the way Albertans think and act and what they aspire to be in Alberta has changed as well. We're becoming a much more connected province. We're becoming less rural and more urban. And our government is not quite there yet as to what Albertans aspire to be. So I would suggest that the Alberta Party is not so much a political party as it is a citizens' movement. There's a lot of folks that I've talked to across this province, a lot of folks that Alberta Party members have talked to across this province, who are looking for something different, something better, something more open and accountable and transparent, something that reflects their values more so than what they're seeing today.
Now, you've spoken in one of the interviews that I read while I was researching this program. You've said that there are 80% of Albertans who are neither left nor right of the spectrum, of the political spectrum, I presume.
Yes.
What is that that you're referring to? Is it the centre?
Yes, it is very much the center, which is also, I believe, reflective of Albertans' values again. Very few of us, in my experience, define themselves as either hard right or hard left. Most Albertans simply want good governance. They want wise use of their tax dollars that we contribute to that good governance. And they simply want to be able to know that government is there when they need it, but not in their way. Government should be about removing roadblocks. It should be about helping citizens live the best quality of life they can. And they are very few that are focused purely on ideology. And the Alberta Party, and certainly my leadership style, is about finding the best ideas and not being tied to ideology. And I believe that reflects that vast majority of Albertans that don't identify with either far left or far right.
Isn't it, if I may use the word, presumptive? Because had they not been far left or far right, they wouldn't have voted for the Tories for 40-some plus years.
Yes.
So what is it that gives you that a different perspective of the changing pulse of Alberta? What is it?
Well, certainly in my experience across the province of Alberta, from a rural perspective, I've traveled the province listening to Albertans and trying to understand what their challenges are in my role with Rural Alberta's Development Fund. I've spent many years working with the Alberta urban municipalities, so I've got a very strong understanding of what happens in the urban perspective. But there's a commonality there that government today in Alberta doesn't seem to be serving the interests of the citizens that elected them to represent them. So this isn't coming from me. This is coming from the Albertans that I've spent a decade listening to and representing.
Your leader, Sue Huff, who's right now the leader of the party, I had the opportunity to meet her, interview her, and she said the same thing, that we're talking to Albertans. Who are these Albertans? They're the same teachers' unions. Mm-hmm. They're the same union leaders. I mean, is it somebody different you're talking to? Or is it the same people who have already shaped so much of the political and social development of Alberta? I mean,
yes, and have shaped them by their actions and their work, I would suggest as well. Right? The folks that engage in small business, that really form the backbone of Albertan. The folks that have, they employ one or two people, maybe they work for a small business. They're not all employed by big government, so to speak. These folks have been coming out and talking to us as well. But our biggest learning, my biggest learning, is that most Albertans have simply chosen to disengage. I don't think they've lost faith in Alberta, but they've lost faith in the process that they're involved in. And so they've simply decided to not be engaged anymore. And that's where I think we need to focus on, is the reason that Albertans are disengaged and how we can bring them back into the process, how they can be responsible citizens again. But let me tell you a story, if I may. Back in March of 2009, there was a group of people that got together in Red Deer. These folks were concerned about government being kind of gummed up. The conference was called Reboot. And the idea here is that just like a computer, the system wasn't responding very well, and the best answer was to reboot it. At that conference, which I attended, there was people that were self-identified as progressive conservatives, as liberals, as New Democrats, wild rose, unidentified, folks from all walks of life, about 200 and some were there. And they all had a common concern, which is that they didn't think that the government that had been elected to represent their interests was representing their interests anymore. It had become almost a voice into the citizens about government policy rather than a citizen's voice into government. And that's where the Alberta Party got reborn, actually, was at that Reboot conference where people came together to talk about what they could do, what responsibilities they have, what responsibilities we have to re-engage and fix this democracy.
Let's face this. Most of the people who are responsible for bringing any political party into power are these huge organizations like labor unions, like teachers' unions. Mm-hmm. Without these, without pandering to the demands of these kind of organizations, how do you think Alberta, your party, Alberta Party, is going to make a dent in the jammed political quagmire? I mean, there are 3 parties already, or 4.
Yes.
And how would you make that dent?
Well, again, I'd have to disagree first off that most parties come into existence by working with labor unions or with organizations at a greater level. I think most democratic parties actually come into existence by identifying with the citizens and the citizens yearning for a better democracy. We're seeing that happen around the world today.
I'd just like to give you an example. Sorry for interrupting you here. Let's look at the Tories, hardcore. You know, they're riding on the back of those, let's put it more subtly, the Alberta Union, Teachers Union. They're pandering today with a 4% or whatever hike that was, a hike that they said they wouldn't go in for, and they did accept that hike in the teachers' salaries.
Yes.
Why? Well, not because they really wanted to. Even so, what my point is that even if the Tories, hardcore Tories, did it, why wouldn't anybody else do it?
Well, first off, I believe that they were honoring a contractual commitment that they'd made. And I do believe that if you make a contract, a promise, then you need to do your best to fulfill it. So I don't believe that the budget is as dire as the progressive conservatives have led us to believe, for example. We don't have a debt or a deficit here. We went through some hard times in the 90s. And I don't understand why it's always a projection of doom and gloom. And then a year later, they find out, well, actually, we didn't quite get it right, and here's an extra $1 billion or $2 billion. Meanwhile, they're cutting the services that our citizens require. And I don't have a problem, actually, with a government that actually meets its commitments and meets its promises. But that being said, I do not believe that we're using our resources and our tax dollars wisely. And there needs to be a revisit of the system and the process that helps us arrive at the decisions about what our budget dollars are being spent on.
Before we move on to that, I'll pin you down on this one. Sorry about that.
Okay.
We have the immigrants who form a lot of a very valid part of the economy. I mean, a large part of our economy. Yes. Their budget was slashed. The budget of the immigration department was slashed. It may be viable that, yeah, there are people who speak English, so we may not need so much of funding in that particular department, but there are other things that need to be done in the immigration department, for instance, jobs for immigrants. How come the government could renege on that, but not on that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
They could go ahead with the teachers' increase in hike, which they had already put a freeze on before they decided, just as soon as the leadership battle began, they just went back on it, on the freeze, and they said, no, we are going to fulfill that promise. So how come immigrants who don't have a voice, they don't have a voice, so how come their budget, the government had the courage to slash their budget and not the teachers' budget?
Well, I believe it's for the very reason that the immigrants, like many, many Albertans, don't have a voice. They're not being heard. The MLAs are no longer representing citizens' voice into the legislature. The system has gotten kind of twisted, actually. The idea that an MLA's job is to represent government's position to the citizens that elected them is completely contrary to what a healthy democracy should be. MLA's job, and certainly at the Alberta Party, the discussions that we're having, the MLA's job, their main function and role will be to bring the citizens' voice into the legislature. Now, in my home community, we went through the recent oil boom, as we like to call it. We couldn't have survived with our small businesses without some resources from immigrants, as temporary foreign workers came in to work in our restaurants and our service industries and filled that gap. So I don't know how this province can grow without immigration. So let's put that right on the table right off the bat. Certainly the census figures are showing that we're not having enough babies to meet the challenges coming forward. We're not growing a population internally. We've also got the challenge of an underemployed workforce in our Aboriginal population. And where are the mechanisms to help the Aboriginals become more educated, better prepared to enter today's workforce? There's a myriad of concerns. And it seems to me that we're not focusing on the right questions. So how can you come up with the right answers?
Right. So what, as a policy person, as if you are to become, you may win the leadership race.
I fully intend to, yes.
So from a policy perspective, how would you have done this differently? This particular issue that we're talking about, how would you have done it, given the constraints of revenue?
Again, and this speaks actually right to the whole way that I believe we can do governance differently. And this is about engaging the people that are affected by it, not hand-picked, specialized people, but the citizens that are directly affected by it, and include those that have expertise as well. Have these discussions openly. Tour the province and talk to the people that are directly affected by it, including immigrants, whether they're a landed immigrant status or a citizenship or not. Talk to the people that are directly affected by it. Bring the people to the table that have a diverse opinion. It can't be all listening to your friends and then come up with a policy that makes sense, because quite frankly, that doesn't even happen in a coffee shop in Alberta where everybody agrees on what they're talking about. Have those conversations openly. Prepare the reports and release those openly, and let's find the solutions together, and don't be afraid of what you're going to hear. What I'm seeing today, and what many Albertans have told me, is that too often these discussions happen behind closed doors. We have to trust that caucus is having these discussions. We have to trust that cabinet is having these discussions. And then out it comes on the legislature. And on the floor of the legislature, it's not about good ideas anymore. It's about political ideology. It's about parties butting heads. That doesn't serve democracy well. We need to get to the people that I believe have the solutions. They're at the local level. They live and work in Alberta. They're not paying a whole lot of attention to politics, but they certainly have an opinion that needs to be heard.
But given the bottlenecks of the revenue situation at the moment, and let's presume that you are the Alberta Party leader, who would you slash? Whose budget would you slash?
Well, first off, I don't believe we need to slash. Again, that's talking, we've got a $60 billion surplus. It's about how we spend our resources. I can't believe that we're under attack right now because the savings fund that was put aside for this very purpose, a downturn in the economy, and people are upset that we're spending money. I personally believe that this is the time to spend money. You're seeing that in municipalities right across the province. There's a better opportunity to get lower cost labor. There's a better opportunity to get lower cost materials, and we're not competing with the superheated economy of the private sector for the same services. This is the time to be reinvesting in Alberta. So I don't buy into this. There has to be something slashed. That's this whole idea of doom and gloom. This is the right time to be spending in Alberta, and we should be investing in services, because right now we are pretty certain there's going to be another economic boom coming. We're seeing some of the announcements that are happening. Our economy is recovering. Are we going to be ready for when this takes off again? I don't think so. This should be when we're increasing our investment in education and doing healthcare better by being more responsible with the resources that we have and talking to the people that know how this system should work.
That's why I asked you the question. Increasing teacher salary, and on the other hand, you have students who are not getting what they want.
That's right.
And this has been openly admitted by the teachers themselves, right?
Yes.
Just yesterday I read somewhere in the newspaper, oh, they're so grumpy about it. Yes, but forsake that. Forsake your pay increases, and let's get down to the students. This is all about the future generations. As a person who is in charge, let's forget that you are still running for the leadership. Let's think for a moment, presume for a moment you are the leader. What would you do?
Well, let's start from the premise that education is the answer. I believe that education is the silver bullet that's going to address the challenges that we're faced with in Alberta today, in Canada today, in North America and the world today. I don't believe it needs to be one or the other. And even if there was a reduction in the teacher's salary, and I'm not a teacher and I'm not defending the pay increases, again, keep in mind that I believe a contract made should be honored. But what I'm suggesting is that we shouldn't be so mean-spirited that it's one or the other. There's a whole mechanism in play right now that's removing the ability from the teacher to connect with the student, and that's really what education should be about. Working towards this government-mandated achievement standard is leaving an incredible amount of children behind from my experience. I have a nephew who dropped out of high school in grade 10 because he wasn't interested in the sciences. He works with his hands. He didn't get the trades training that he was interested in. He needed to be able to foster his creative spirit in school. People that like spoken word and dance, people that are artistic, people that like to write novels and dream big are being left behind in our school system. And I don't believe it's just because we're paying the teachers too much. I think it's because we've forgotten the focus in the education system should be on the student and the student-teacher relationship, and all the rest of the stuff that's all around it should be just to support that dynamic and that relationship.
So you, if I understand you correctly, please do check me if I'm misunderstanding you. What I presume is that you would be dipping more into the sustainability fund and the reserves of the province to meet the demands and not have those cuts actually in place for the students that have occurred because of the pay hike.
Our province is absolutely, and I don't know that it has to be dipping into the sustainability fund either, because I don't have access to the books. The way they do budgeting in this province is so private. Secret, if you will, to a large degree, how they come up with these ideas. How do you give a school board authority but not the authority to make the decisions when it comes to spending? That makes no sense to me. We used to have the ability where school boards would have the authority to represent the interests at a local level. So I'm not convinced that any more spending has to happen. The question is, are we spending right? Are we spending on the things that need to be financed? And this all becomes about pointing fingers, and it shouldn't be. Let's remove all this, examine how much money is in the education system, figure out what's in the best interest of the children that are there to be educated, primarily, I would hope, to be educated to become better citizens. And then let's try and fix it from within by talking to the people that are directly affected by it. And it shouldn't be about either or. It should be about how.
You're talking about an idealistic situation where there's funds coming in. There's no dearth of funds. Oil prices will be $80, $100 a barrel at all given points in time. That's idealistic.
What's wrong with idealism?
Nothing wrong.
We should dream big. We should dream fantastic dreams. And then we need to have the focus to deliver on these dreams. And we should be able to do this within the current budget, I believe. We've got 3.8 million Albertans and a $40 billion annual budget, and we don't know what the outcomes are that we're expecting. That's the kind of conversations that I would like to lead as the leader of the Alberta Party. We need to revisit and review the entire system. It's become moribund, and it's become jammed up, and people are taking positions of ideology when we need to be finding the right answers by asking better questions and not be afraid to engage like that.
So let's move on, and let's not get tied up in this, and let's move on to the other issues. Lots of questions flashed across my mind when I read this interview given some time back to an Edmonton-based newspaper, and I quote, "When he attended the November 2009 meeting of Reboot Alberta, a group that aims to re-engage Albertans in politics, and the Alberta Party convention, 1 year later, he met kindred spirits, deep thinkers, activists, and people involved in the campaign of the mayor of Calgary, still Nimshi. So what's different in their actions? What do you find is so different in their actions?
For one thing, they're coming from a position of responsibility. They understand that it is the citizens' responsibility. If we believe that our democracy is in peril or found wanting, then we have a responsibility to engage. So that was the first place. The other thing I liked was that it was essentially nonpartisan. It was people that shared the ideal that we could engage and we could have these big discussions about the best interests of Alberta, and it crossed party lines. But they also came from the position of understanding that that it's not working right now for the vast majority of citizens in Alberta. So that was a big difference. The other difference was that it was a diverse group. There was young and old, there was men and women, there was university-educated people, professors, former elected members of the Legislative Assembly, ministers of education were there. University students were there, and they all came together and talked about how they could affect change in what they see as a challenging issue in front of Albertans today, and that's the state of our democracy. And that excited me. So I paid attention. For the next year, after the Reboot 1 conference, I started watching how this was coming about and how these people who'd met, Chima Kandaram and Naheed Nenshi, prior to the mayoral campaign in Calgary, were there. They'd met some folks from rural Alberta, some folks from the Green Party, and they got together to talk about how we could affect change. And they didn't all come up with the same answer, and that I liked as well. Some people talked about, for example, we're going to continue to work from within the parties that we already identify with to affect change from within. I think we've seen an example of that in 2 cases where it was less than effective. When Dr. Raj Sherman stood up to talk about the challenges that he believed to be present in the healthcare system, and the response of the government was to ask him to leave their government. When Guy Boudelier from Wood Buffalo, Fort McMurray, stood up to talk about the challenges that the seniors were facing up there in that economic hotbed and was asked to leave the government. These people have tried to affect change from within, and there's a lot of folks out there that will still try to. We're seeing that happen today with a variety of leadership candidates putting their name forward for the PCs right now. There's also a group out there that wanted to affect change by writing position papers that would, continue to write background documents that would inform government and try and change policy by offering alternatives. A group that wanted to affect change by social action. They don't mind getting a picket sign and marching outside and having their voices be heard. But the group that attracted me was the one that decided, instead of trying to fix the politics of yesterday, why don't we build a new citizens movement that reflects the values that were at that conference that weekend, that we believe reflects the values of most Albertans, and build a new political entity and start from scratch? A much more difficult job.
I'm going to act like the way a hardened, skeptical Albertan would. Is this university politics, Glenn Taylor?
No, I've never been to university, actually, so I'm not sure.
It's too simplistic. It's too simplistic. The people who would be, I agree there's disenchantment, but when it comes to the real politics, it's a different ballgame altogether.
Yes.
So are you trying to say that it's going to completely change, considering that the people who will be involved will be perhaps the same people? How would you deal with the same hardened kind of organizations, bureaucracies? As I said, the unions, not just the unions, they have a point of view as well. They are somewhere balancing the absolute power of the government.
That's
but
right.
How would you deal with these kind of situations?
Well, first off, this isn't reinventing something. This is taking a model that's been extremely successful right here in Alberta. At a municipal level, right across this province, that's exactly what's happening. Government is nonpartisan. People get elected based on their platforms, their positions, their ideas. They come together to discuss what's in the best interests of the citizens that they were elected to represent. They do this in an open fashion, in front of the media. At council chambers, it's mandated by law under the Legislative Government Act that these discussions take place in the public eye. And then they reach consensus and they move forward to a decision. And ideally, those decisions are in the best interest of the majority of the citizens of that community and in their best interest. So this is about taking politics and governance that I believe has already been incredibly effective and is the most trusted order of government in our province today, and replicating that at a provincial level. So it's not about starting from new, it's about applying lessons that have been seen to be effective and applying them at a larger level and a larger scale.
I do remember having this conversation with you about your experience, your decade-long experience at the municipal level, and perhaps that's what you could bring into provincial politics.
Yes.
Tell us more about what you learned from your municipal. You are the mayor of Hinton. So
yes.
What did you learn? What did that teach you?
Well, an incredible amount, actually. First off, it taught me that not all citizens agree together on every item. So what you need to provide is a safe environment for them to have these debates, have these discussions, an environment where the opposing positions and opinions can be brought forward for considerations. My experience as the mayor will be the same experience that I would bring to the table as the leader of the Alberta Party. And this is the idea that your role is to set a safe environment so that these discussions, including the opinion that is not that of the majority, can be heard and discussed and validated. And then in the end, help them come to a decision and move on. So first off, there's that piece. The second piece is, of course, how we do governance at a municipal level. This whole idea of doing it openly, inviting citizens in to watch how we work. In my community, we put it up on the internet every council meeting, and we'll make a decision on a Tuesday night. Wednesday morning, my neighbor will be handing me a cup of coffee across the fence and saying, "Glenn, what the heck were you guys thinking last night?" We're that close to the level of the people that are impacted by our decisions. So, how we do budgeting, for example. The budget process. Why is it that the budget process is done in secret behind closed doors and then it's presented as a fait accompli and then they defend the positions, rather than engage the citizens early on in the process by being much more open about the decisions that we're making? These conversations about how can we afford the type of schooling that I believe all Albertans deserve access and opportunity for. Let's have those discussions openly. Then we get to understand why we can or why we can't, and then it goes forward for consideration and further discussion. That's how we're doing it currently in Alberta at a municipal level. The other thing that I get to bring forward, one of the things I'm asking our party membership to give consideration to, is that I've got the experience of having led a diverse population for a decade in my role as a leader in an elected position. And I think this young party needs that kind of stability and experience as well. And it's about bringing these ideas and how we do governance onto the political level.
In fact, a fresh perspective that you talked about, despite all my skepticism, but you do bring that kind of, new vision to the party.
Yes.
The other thing we were talking about was your international experience as far as work in Africa goes.
Yes.
So we'd like to know more about that and how that how that plays out.
Well, actually, I'm a child of a Canadian military family, so I traveled the world as a young man growing up. I spent some time in Europe. I spent some time traveling the world as an adult. And my home community had an international partnership with a couple of developing nations in Africa. Most recently, we were in Tanzania. And part of our responsibility there, part of my role there, was to actually help the Tanzanians, develop a more representative democracy. And we were also working with them on economic development and economic diversification. We were able to partner with them for a number of reasons. Like-sized communities, the new economic diversification that we believe they were looking for was not unlike what we're trying to do here in Alberta. We've got this wonderful resource, the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains, that can be marketed. Our community's been busy doing those kinds of things. They've got the Indian Ocean and a heck of an opportunity down there. And they have a responsibility in a democratic society to have a more representative government. So that's the things we were doing with them. And I can tell you that it affected me deeply when I first went to Africa. People with so very little, were willing to share it. That they understood that the focus of their responsibility was to look after their family, look after each other, and do it through community and through their villages and do it through working together in the best interests of. And then we come back here. And when I talk about democracy is broken, it's certainly not anything compared to what I've seen around the world. But that's also why it's our responsibility to make sure that we kept raising the bar and setting it higher. Because when I reflect on my service and my community's partnerships with these developing nations, that's part of our responsibility as a world citizen. And so I will bring that perspective as well to my leadership about we've actually got it pretty good. But that doesn't mean we get to rest on our laurels. We've got much further to go. In
fact, one of the advantages you have, as you said, is the fact that you're from a military background.
Yes.
Is there some kind of, are you bitter about the way that some sections of society are being treated, especially keeping in light some of the things that have happened with the army and the needs of the army, for instance, how the bureaucracy deals with them? How would you take on these kind of issues? How would you deal with this?
Well, at a provincial level, of course, we don't have a lot of influence about the Canadian military. But I do believe that Canadians have an incredible amount of pride in what we stand for on the international stage. And it's about the pride, I think, of what we've accomplished in this harsh environment of the northern climate that we live in, and it's how we've accomplished it. We understand our responsibility to one another. You don't drive by somebody stuck in a snowbank very often without stopping to help dig them out. That's the Canadian way. We understand working and helping our neighbors. And I believe Alberta is the most uniquely positioned province in the country to start leading the way of how we can be better for the world by being better for Canada. Not just the best in the world, but the best for the world. And we can do that by setting the bar higher. Why can't we be the best in education, the best for the world in the environment and in the economy, and in energy and research and health? These are things that we can aspire to, because who better than us? We know energy.
Yeah, but how will you deal? My question is, the way that I look at it is, you have this hardcore fixed attitude as far as corporations are concerned. They are not going to spend more than this much on environment, and you have the difficult task of dealing with the bureaucracy. How would you manage all this? How oil sands, for instance?
Absolutely.
How would you?
Well, first off, I believe that we need to respect our public servants. Those people that went to work to serve the citizens of this province, serve the citizens of this country, serve the citizens of our municipality, do a hard job, and I believe try to do it well. So we need to respect the role of the public service. I believe that we need to help reinstill pride in government and in Alberta by leading the way as well. For example, we're the owners of the resources. The oil sands and the natural economy, the forests, the trees, the energy, those belong to Albertans. And we should be making sure that we get fair value for leasing out the resources that Albertans own. That question needs to be asked. I believe, actually, that Premier Stelmach got it pretty much right when he asked for the royalty review. We're not hearing a whole lot of pushback on the royalty review regarding the oil sands. We do need to have an understanding of what Albertans deserve in return for the use of the resources that we own jointly. I believe, for example, in the oil sands especially, that we can't separate the environment from the economy. That doing an application process for a new oil sands development should come with it an understanding of how the reclamation is going to happen when it's all said and done. And the money should be set aside today based on the real cost of doing reclamation, so that when it's time to do it in the future, if those same companies are pleading bankruptcy, as we see sometimes when it comes to reclamation of oil and gas wells, that it doesn't fall to the citizens of Alberta to now step up and pay for that. It's about understanding the real responsibilities of renting out or leasing out the resources so that we're left with an environment that can be reclaimed back as close as it can possibly be to the natural state. And this is how they do it in coal mining, for example.
But aren't you worried that you'll run headlong into a collision with these guys? I mean, with these companies?
I believe we will.
Because, for instance, they may not want to pay for the natural resources like water, which they're not already. They're not paying for some of the natural resources that they're utilizing. Natural gas, for instance, it's a diminishing resource, and yet we are pumping so much of natural gas just to extract bitumen.
Yes.
So do these things worry you, and how would you take on these kind of issues that are really tough issues?
Well, I think government's job is to represent the best interests of its citizens. And again, I'm not convinced that the government currently is doing that. I'm certainly not seeing that right now from what I'm learning about the Wild Rose Alliance, for example. It's about who are we governing on behalf of? And it should be government's role to look after the future of our province. We owe a debt to the future of Alberta, to the citizens of the future of Alberta. I know that sounds idealistic. It's not meant to be. But the bottom line is if we take all the resources today and don't leave anything for tomorrow, we haven't done our job. And again, I've got some practical experience here. And these are through
coal mines.
Well, through coal mines, absolutely. We've seen, a coal mine, quite bluntly, takes a mountain and turns it into a valley. But with a good reclamation plan, which I've seen on the eastern slopes of the Rockies, there's still wildlife present, there's still fish and there's in the streams, and there's still usable land afterwards, as long as they're held accountable to the reclamation expectations. But even more than that, over the past 2 years, I've been working at a provincial level helping communities develop sustainability plans. And the idea behind a sustainability plan is that you need to identify the 5 or 6 pillars that matter to the community and to the citizens that they represent. Generally, they fall into 5 areas. The pillars of a sustainable community, sustainable Alberta, need to consider the economy, the environment, our culture, needs to understand the creative community that we represent, and how we do governance. And you can't make a decision on the environment without giving due consideration to how that's going to impact. If you can't make a decision on energy without understanding how it's going to impact on the environment. You can't make a decision on the environment and the energy without having an understanding of what the effect on the economy is going to be.
But these are so complex. The issues are so complex here. For instance, would you stop utilizing natural gas for extracting bitumen?
Right.
What would you do there?
Well, first off, let's start from the position that most people are looking for politicians to have all the answers. The truth of the matter is we don't. But what we do need, I believe, is politicians and elected representatives are willing to have these tough conversations. Bring the people into the room. Bring the Parkland Institute and the Pembina Institute into the room. Bring the people that are reflecting a right-wing perspective and a left-wing perspective, a business perspective and an economic perspective and an ecological and environmental perspective, and put them in the room and let's have these conversations.
You know the answer. Format. Nobody would like the environment to be, to play second fiddle. So then the question arises, as a leader of a party,
yes.
How would you earn your revenues? So what would you do?
We make these decisions every day. I've been making these decisions every day in a policy-setting perspective as the mayor of my community. And it's about finding the answer that's in the best interest of the majority of the citizens that we serve. So it's not an either-or, it's about how. And I believe that there is work out there that shows that we can do energy extraction, energy development, and we can also understand the impacts on the environment and how we need to mitigate those impacts. It's not one or the other. It's how we do it in a more responsible manner. And that's what I'm talking about, using these, for lack of a better term, these sustainability principles. So that when we're making these decisions, we're having full understanding of the impact, both good and bad, on the other areas that could be affected by this. So that matters, and that's the kind of open discussion I think we need to have. Like I said earlier, it can't be about the ideology. It's got to be about the idea, and it shouldn't be about winners and losers, right. Because neither one is that finite.
Okay, so as a leader of as yet to be formed party, what do you think people need to know that is vital to understanding this party, besides the fact that you want to keep to the center of ideology?
Yes.
I mean, to center of
to find the good ideas, yeah. And support those.
Yeah.
I think, first off, this isn't an easy road we travel.
Right.
Democracy never is. It would be very easy to just set a policy position and then go out and try and sell it. I think that would be irresponsible and not in the best interest of, again, the citizens that we're hoping to represent through the Alberta Party. I believe that it can't be about refining the failed politics of yesterday. It's got to be about how we can do it differently. And we're seeing this right across the world today, where people are taking direct democracy into their own hands because they believe that it's somehow failed them, and they're willing to stand up and re-engage as citizens with their responsibility again. That's what I see in the Alberta Party. I really do see people, young and old, experienced and inexperienced, from business perspectives and from environmental activism perspectives, that are willing to get together to talk about what we need to do as Albertans to move this province into the 21st century economy.
We have a question here from Rick Newcomb in the chat room. Did the people of Hinton give you a clear mandate to spend time on pursuing leadership of a provincial party?
Well, a lot of people are confused about this. Most municipalities outside the major cities, the mayor's job is actually a part-time job. Most of us actually have full-time positions, or we have part-time jobs that supplement the income. In my case, what we've done is, first off, yes, I had these discussions with the community, and quite frankly, the timing couldn't be worse for what I'm doing with the Alberta Party and what's happening in the province of Alberta when it comes to this change that's in the air. Unfortunately, without fixed election dates, we don't get to choose the timing of what's going on and how that's coming down. But what I did was, As I became more interested in the Alberta Party, and in November, when the Alberta Party had its first policy convention, after traveling across the province and listening to citizens and putting together these policy ideas, I went to the policy conference and I watched how the rubber hit the road, so to speak. I watched how people engaged, weren't even party members necessarily, engaged in the discussion to help formulate the policy that's there today. And it validated everything I've been paying attention to for the past year. So when I decided that, one, I like the Alberta Party and what it stands for, and two, I have something to offer through my experience as an elected leader, I went and talked to the media in my community. We've got 2 weekly papers and a third one out of Jasper that come out every other day. And I went and talked to them about this Alberta Party and what my aspirations were to potentially seek the leadership of it. Front page articles in both the Hinton weeklies as well as editorials. I put it up on my Facebook page, and then I went out and talked to the community. I went to our Chamber of Commerce, had a luncheon with them, and spent an hour with them talking about making myself available to have these conversations. I went to volunteer organizations and service groups and had these conversations. And overwhelmingly, the response I was getting back was, Glenn, this is what you should be doing. That I should be doing. This is what you've done in Hinton, and we believe that you have the abilities to do this on a provincial level. One of the local newspapers did an online poll, and we got 79% support for, if I was to become leader of the Alberta Party, 79% support for what I'm trying to do. So the sense I got back from the community is yes. Now, how do you answer that question without talking to every citizen? You make yourself available. I will be held accountable for my actions. I also talked to my council and asked my council what they thought. And overwhelmingly, my council said, this is the time. You need to step forward and put your abilities and make them available for this emerging Alberta Party, because now is the time. And you do have the skill sets to offer, and you've got a dearth of experience to offer as well. So I reached the comfort level that my community is okay with this. And certainly I haven't heard anything to say otherwise, other than what happens next. So after May 28th, if I'm successful in seeking the leadership of the Alberta Party, I need to have another conversation with my community.
And there's another question from Rick from the chat room. What is your view on Alberta taking on ownership position in resource development?
I believe we own it. We've got an ownership position. I don't know that we necessarily need to be involved in the investment into private companies, but government's responsibility is really about setting the framework that they operate from within. We need to clearly articulate and understand what the regulatory framework is, what the expectations are, what our return on the investment is from Albertans leasing out of or purchasing of the natural resources that we all own. And I also believe that government's responsibility, and certainly if I was a leader of the Alberta Party, this is a direction that I would try to bring our party in, is that we have a role as government to be the regulators. When some political parties talk about smaller government, I worry that what they're talking about is transferring a government responsibility to private industry. We've seen this in food and drug, for example, where a drug provider is also responsibility for testing the safeness of it. Well, industry's main responsibility is to return increased return on a shareholder's investment. Government's responsibility is to ensure the safety of its citizens. And so there is a role there that needs to be taken on by government, and it should be about setting the regulatory framework and the expectations of protecting the long-term future of the citizens.
In fact, when I was earlier talking about bureaucracy, that is what I meant was how would you sharpen a government role to meet the changing role of present days. For instance, strong regulation. We've seen in the case of BP, for instance, everything was there. Everything was there. But someone, not just in one department, but more than one department, failed to do their job properly. That is what I meant by taking on the bureaucracy. How would you ensure that?
Well, do you believe that it was a bureaucracy that failed or the company that failed to follow the policy that was already in place and the legislation that was already in place?
What I understand is that it is up to the government to check if the regulations that they have set in place are being enforced.
Yes.
So on that side, yes, it was the government. But on the other hand, we have the corporate greed, which we all know about, and we don't want to, for lack of a better word, I would say corporate greed. Their job is to keep increasing to their profitability, even at the cost of safety. So to that extent, no. And then BP has had a bad background as far as safety goes.
They do.
So it was all the more incumbent on the bureaucracy to see that that the rules were being followed, but they failed to. How would you?
Well, first off, I wouldn't call it corporate greed. Their return on profit's not a bad thing. You know, that's actually what drives the economy of Alberta.
Right.
But again, it's about whose role belongs where. And I've had a very personal experience of when government regulation fell short. And this is, for example, back in the early 90s, there were men dying of asbestos poisoning in the pulp mill in Hinton. And the government's responsibility, it's quite clear that asbestos is a carcinogenic. It's quite clear that there is a responsibility to ensure that workers aren't exposed to asbestos, or if they're going to be exposed to asbestos, that they're done so in a safe environment so they can protect their health. This simply wasn't happening. We're starting to see some of this today now. The provincial government, I believe, announced today that they're going to have more health and safety officers doing inspections. Absolutely right, because that's the role of government. We should be having more inspectors on the ground doing the job. Putting regulation in place is one thing, but enforcing regulation is really where it starts to matter. And that's what I mean about the responsibility and acceptability of having public servants doing their job. These folks should be on the ground out there ensuring that we're not having tailings ponds spilling into rivers, ensuring that the Health and Safety Act is actually being regulated and enforced, and ensuring that industries and the businesses are meeting the intent as well as the letter of. And the less regulation and oversight we have, the more dangerous it becomes to earn a living, and the tougher it becomes as well, because regulation without enforcement doesn't get us anywhere.
So I think we have another question from the chat room. And that's from Miradat from the chat room asking, given that there is a kind of a consensus that there needs to be a change in AHS, how do you convince someone in middle management to reduce the number of people to him or her, and then say that the position they have is pointless, unnecessary?
Yeah, I think I understand the point of this question.
It's a bit of a complexly written.
Can you truly work effectively to make your own position redundant? Can you work yourself out of a job, I think is what this person is asking, and can we expect that to happen? Yes, actually, I think that's exactly what should be happening. We should be going to the people that are most responsible for delivery of the service and asking them, how do we do this better? We see this in private industry all the time. We do efficiency studies. They do a review of their work site and expect to find ways that they can save an extra dollar, perhaps offer the service in a more efficient manner. The challenge we have is that it always comes back to job loss. And so people want to protect their job and protect their interests, and of course you would. That's how you feed your family and keep a roof over your head. You have a very personal interest to make sure that you're protecting your job. That being said, I also believe that, especially from what little I know of the Alberta Health Services, that we're getting in the way of them doing the job that they went to school to do. When I see nurses who are now spending time cleaning floors when they went to school to become a nurse, that's not the best use of that health professional, for example. I believe that there's enough money in the system from the background that I've read. It's a matter about how are we using these dollars effectively. In British Columbia, for example, they put right up on their health ministry's website the expected outcomes of what their ministry will achieve when it comes to having healthy citizenry. From what I understand, I don't have the facts and the numbers in front of me, but from what I understand, British Columbia has the second highest achievement in health outcomes and the second lowest cost going into the system. In Alberta, it's completely reversed. We've got the second lowest achievement, Canadian standard health outcomes, and the second highest cost. There's something wrong with the system. But I also believe it's about ensuring that when we go in to do these systems, we need to make sure that we're protecting the people that we're working with. That in order for them to share with us, they have to be protected from the fear of losing their job if they come out and tell the truth about what they're seeing in the system. Again, I've had practical experience of this at a municipal level. We've managed in my small community to increase the output by defining what the outcomes are expected to be, and then removing the roadblocks so that they become more effective in the delivery of what it is we've hired them to do, whether it's in planning, whether it's in recreation, whether it's in social services. The idea here is to set a strategic direction and say, you tell us how we're going to achieve this goal. I'm hired to, not me personally, but as a manager, I'm hired to deliver the skill set that I developed through school, through practical experience, through the hiring process. As an elected representative, my job is to set the policy direction, hire the right people, and then get out of the way and give them the tools that they need to be successful. And when they start to realize that we're not going to throw them under the bus every time they get it wrong, because it's in my best interest to be reelected to blame it on somebody else. If that's the direction we set, I've got responsibility as a governor to also share that burden with them to ensure that we're getting to the right answer. So we need to rebuild trust. We need to make sure that we're efficiently using the resources that are available, and we need to go and talk to the people that are on the ground delivering the services. And I think that can all happen if we rebuild the relationship between government and the public service.
But the crying need at the moment is more jobs. How would you go about creating more jobs? You know, you've done at a micro level what you may do at a macro level later on if you're elected.
Yes.
So what needs to be done to get those jobs going?
Well, first off, we have to have a realistic look at the type of education that's needed and how it's delivered. What skills are we lacking, and how can we get those? Unquestionably, there's much more of a burden on rural Albertans trying to get a post-secondary education simply because of distance, if nothing else. We need to understand and validate that having a trade, being a pipe fitter or being a carpenter or a heavy-duty mechanic, is as valid as it is to have a university doctorate degree. We need all of those in our community. So we have to start removing barriers to help our workforce and our students achieve their potential, whatever that might be. And
this is, again, going back to what we were having such a heated argument about.
I thought it was just a discussion.
Yeah,
not an argument.
I mean, some may view it otherwise. But, you know, how would you, given the resources that you have, we need more schools in rural areas. Would you agree or no, disagree?
I would agree.
Agreed. How would you, given the resources? Again, I mean, you know, when I talk about, when we were having that discussion, it was all about how would you convince teachers. It's not about being mean-spirited. It's about convincing people that there are other priorities, perhaps. Yes. How would you do it?
Well, I'll give you an example. And again, this goes back to some practical experience. When I was chairperson of Rural Alberta's Development Fund, actually even before when I was chairperson of Rural Alberta's Development Fund, there was a number of schools across the province that were threatening to be shut down. One of them is the Warner School in Warner, Alberta. The folks from Warner came up with this idea that they could save their school if they brought in a ladies' hockey training camp. And it became the idea was that they could bring in students from outside who would pay for their education because they were going to that school to focus on developing their skills as a hockey player. So through some funds, we helped, part of Rural Alberta's Development Fund was responsible for also funding capacity building ideas like this that weren't in the traditional sense of how you do things. And we supported the development of the Warner Hockey School for Girls. And a most amazing thing happened. Not only did they attract better teachers to the school, they built better facilities in the school. The community started to grow as well, because now they were starting to get shops that were servicing these children that came in from other areas. And what they managed to do was not only save their school by thinking a little bit outside the box and ensuring that their students get the best education that's available to them, they're also building capacity in their community and in the long term saving a rural community that's under trouble. So they took this idea and they transferred it. So now we have a school that's the West Wind Academy of Rodeo, I believe it is, and there's a baseball school out there. And it's about utilizing the facilities and understanding that it doesn't always have to be the traditional model.
Exactly.
And how we can find better answers. And I think, again, the world has changed. And I'm not sure that our education system has changed to keep up with that. So it's about those kinds of conversations and solutions. And it's about doing things differently, but not losing focus of why we're doing it, the best interest of the students.
Okay, now you're the best person to answer this question again. Do you think it's time for municipalities, provinces, and at the federal level to have different models in terms of creating income or revenue independently? I mean, it's instead of depending on the limited resources, do you think it's time for them to have these independent models of earning?
I wouldn't be afraid of those conversations, but I would have to start from a position of, for example, we need to have the conversations about how best to deliver services in the best interest of the citizens who are expecting these services. for a reasonable return on their tax dollar.
Without taxing them further.
That's right. I don't know that we necessarily need to tax further. It's about, are we currently utilizing that $40 billion properly and efficiently today? And I think that there are different models. For example, in healthcare, I like the idea of primary care networks. I like the idea of nurses with higher skill sets being able to do things like triage, to decide if you need to see a doctor or not. We have to be willing to have those conversations so that we can find the right answer for a better utilization of the skills and the resources. Too often, I think people come out of college to be a teacher, to be a nurse, and they find out when they get into the system that it holds them back from doing what they trained to do and what they yearn to do. So we need to get back there. I believe a lot of the work that our Education Minister David Hancock did deserves to see the light of day. There was some fantastic stuff in this report, and they developed it by talking to the teachers and talking to the school boards about how we could do this better. Now, from what I understand, didn't get a lot of support in caucus.
Really?
No, and that's part of the challenge. These reports are developed, and then they don't seem to go anywhere. There doesn't seem the political will to implement, which is also part of the responsibility of an elected office. Have these conversations, develop these reports, get this perspective, and then act. But act in the best interest of the citizens of Alberta.
Okay, moving on. As a leader, how would you recruit credible candidates? This is another question from Eddie from the chat room.
Okay, I believe first off that it's about this whole idea that citizens need to re-engage. There's a tremendous amount of people out there that I've met, especially in my role at a municipal elected level. There are literally thousands of people that are working in a part-time capacity, volunteer capacity to be their local leaders. For too long in the province of Alberta, it seemed like to me municipal government was a holding place for the next PC-MLA, because the only way you were going to get things done is if you lined up and waited your turn and ran as a PC-MLA. And there's a tremendous amount of fear out there. I'm facing this myself about if you align with other than the PC party, there will be repercussions. And most of the people across this province in healthcare and education and municipal government know exactly what I'm talking about. The nonprofits know exactly what I'm talking about when I say that there's this culture of fear in the province of Alberta if you line up with other than the governing party. And for too long, folks have been waiting their turn. And if you win the nomination, absolutely, I faced it and still do today. If you win the nomination, for example, then it was a given that you won the election. That's not a very healthy democracy in my mind. Democracy is best served by contested elections, by viable alternatives. I'm actually thankful that the Wild Rose Alliance is out there doing what they're doing because, well, I don't support their policy, and I certainly don't necessarily align with the direction that they're going to take our province if they're elected. They've opened up the room for us to have these conversations again, and that's a good thing. Right now, there is a group out there that are going to contest to see whether it will be this conservatism or that conservatism. What we need is a viable alternative to say, how about this progressive type of government instead? And that's what the Alberta Party is doing. And so I believe there's a whole host of experienced people at a municipal level that could take those very same challenges and bring those to a provincial level. And if we can engage those people...
Yeah, you'd be just replicating your experience in a larger...
Replicating the experience rate across this province on a higher level. They're out there, they're the trusted people that have been elected by their citizenship before, they've got experience, and they need a forum in which to exercise that type of democracy here in Alberta.
So what's your what's the future? I mean, do you want to take this party at the federal level as well, or is it just province?
Yeah, I don't have any interest in serving at a federal level. I believe my heart is here in Alberta. I'm a Canadian, very passionate Canadian, but I also believe that Alberta has the opportunity to be the best for Canada and lead Canada by what we do here. I also believe it's different. It's completely different types of government and responsibilities. Right now, what I'm seeing is the opportunity in Alberta to utilize the resources to be the best that we can be. And by that I mean, for example, who better to be looking at alternative energy solutions than the people that do energy so well from a traditional sense? Who best to understand the environment than a province that has, we have the mountain and we have the grasslands and we have all the diversity in between. We've got, desert-type atmospheres, and we can use that diversity and learn from it, and we can do research better, and we can develop an eco-economy based on what's responsible to the long-term interests of the citizen.
Aren't you developing something like that? I went to your website. It's a beautifully done-up website, and a beautiful website it is. And I read something about eco-business.
Yes.
You'd mentioned something about it. Tell us something about it. What is
Here's a great example of the experience that I'd like to bring to a provincial level. My community, my home community of Hinton, and our region is a natural resource-based economy. We have pulp industry, we have forestry industry and sawmills, we have coal mining and energy. Hinton doesn't have agriculture, but our surrounding region certainly does. The town of Hinton has brought in a transit system. For a small community, we've got a little bus that goes around our community on an hourly basis. We built the first eco-industrial park in Canada from greenfield, not from trying to reclaim brownfield, from greenfield. Our municipal building is LEED certified, which is Leaders in Environmental Energy and Design. We just opened an affordable housing project, around 50 units. But this affordable housing project, we did something I think is rather unique. What we did was we did a 3P, private-public partnership. And we insisted that we build this affordable housing project in an environmentally friendly, ecologically responsible manner. So it's actually heated by geothermal heat. Recycled materials in the carpet and paint is recycled, low-E glass, things like that. The private partner came to the table with their money. Municipality matched it. We leveraged this in partnership with the province. And then we did something unique. Not only is it unique because it's environmentally responsible building, but the partner lives in the building and manages it on behalf of the citizens. And 20 years from now, there will be an opportunity where that person can either buy us out at market value or we can buy them out. So there's an incentive to look after the building as well. And we've now brought some attainable housing options in. So here's a community. 10 years ago, our reputation was this pulp mill town you drove through on the way to Jasper. I would suggest that anybody visits today can see that there's a rebirth of pride, and we did it by talking to the citizens and figuring out that we earn our living from the resources. We have a responsibility to be the steward of those resources as well.
I'll come back to that because I need to ask you another question, but there's another question from the chat room. It's from Rick. What's your position or opinion on corporate welfare, like drilling incentives?
Well, I believe that government has a responsibility, especially here in Alberta, to ensure that there's an equal and even playing field so that industry can be successful. We earn our living, like I was just saying, off the natural resources that we are blessed with here in the province of Alberta. Government's responsibility is to ensure that it's a level playing field, that it's attractive to invest in Alberta, and in the end, the expectation is to find that balance between a reasonable return on the investment by the private sector and the resource wealth being distributed properly in the interest of the citizens that own the resource. So there's a balance there. I'm not quite sure what they mean by corporate welfare, but I do believe we don't get anywhere if we don't support private industry in our province. But again, when we're supporting private industry, the question becomes, what is our role as government to set that groundwork and to set the regulatory framework and to ensure that they're working within the regulatory framework and that it's on an equal playing field for all, and that we do the research that we need to do, we provide the services that we need to do to help them become successful.
Right. In fact, I was wanting to get back to that to the infrastructure question. Mm-hmm. A lot is being spent by the government on infrastructure. Do you think it's time? For instance, most of it is around the oil belt. I mean, the oil sands. Yeah. Do you think that it's time that we start asking or demanding at least a certain amount of toll, tax or toll or whatever you may like to call it, from those that are benefiting from that infrastructure spending by the government? Because it's the taxpayers' money after all. For instance, water that is being used by the oil sands is not being paid for. It's free of cost to the best of my knowledge. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's time that these kind of natural environmental resources that are going into the building of industry in Alberta should be billed to those that use them? Well,
I don't know either whether or not water is being bought and paid for like a commodity by the industry. And I do worry that we treat water like a commodity for a lot of different reasons. First and foremost, water is the very essence of a sustainable society. So once you start to make it a commodity that can be bought and sold and traded, then I think we're all going down a slippery slope.
Only for the industrial purposes.
I agree, and it could start there. And I don't know how it's done today. But again, I do know that at a municipal level, there is an expectation that water is metered and that there is a fee associated with it. So most water, primarily because we do drinking water, which requires treatment. And there's a cost related to the treatment of the water as well as the distribution of the water. So it's already an accepted principle that our citizens are paying for the use of the treated water. I do believe we need to start ensuring that we look after this finite resource, and that concerns me greatly. I live at the headwaters of the Athabasca River, and we've seen what's happened in southern Alberta as the water table has dropped and it's becoming more of a commodity and much more valuable. It's becoming an area of concern to me on a personal level, and I do believe that the Water for Life strategy that the provincial government started on a number of years ago, breathed some life into it a couple of years back, and now it's gone quiet again. Those are the kind of things that government should take responsibility for. Commission the report, do the study, don't keep it stuck in a minister's office somewhere, share the results so that we can have these experts come to the table, have these discussions, understand what the right solution is. We can't just continue to give away our resources and expect to get a job in return.
Yeah, but what about the infrastructure building that's happening? After all, we are spending a lot of money on that. Do you think it's time that the government start earning from this investment that it's making on infrastructure?
Well, yes, and I believe that's exactly what corporate taxes should go towards paying. That's exactly what royalties should be going towards paying. A number of years ago, when I first moved to the province, actually, from what I understand, energy royalties went towards paving. And you could tell with closed eyes when you cross the border from BC into Alberta, because the roads were that good. I would suggest today you can tell with your eyes closed when you're crossing the border from Alberta back into BC, because there's been a reversal almost in the expectation of what would be invested in with the revenues that we make off our energy sector. And now that's being paid for, from what I understand, by user fees, through licensing, through insurance and things like that. And so we're being nickel and dimed, if you will, to start paying for stuff today that used to be paid for through our resource revenue that benefited all Albertans. And we need to get back to that again, about how we utilize the resources. And I also think that now is the time to invest in infrastructure. Like I said earlier, we get a better value today. There's more labor available, there's more materials available, and we're not competing and driving a hotter economy by competing with the private sector.
To go back to the graphics, Evan, this newspaper interview, you said it's a bit daunting to be the first person to seek leadership of the fledgling Alberta Party. What is so daunting?
Well, primarily, we're building from scratch. And seeking the leadership of a party that is yet to define itself is challenging. The idea that I've been attending constituency association meetings so I can help people have an opportunity to learn a little bit about me and meet me and ask questions. At the same time, they're trying to learn about the Alberta Party and what we stand for and what we're going to do if we're successful in forming government. So it's been a real daunting experience of going out there, and you're trying to define what the Alberta Party is and what we hope to do. You're trying to define yourself and your leadership style and what I intend to do if I'm successfully chosen as the leader of this new movement. And 3, you're talking to people about the challenges that they're facing and what their hopes and dreams are for Alberta. So it's this wide-ranging discussion that's going on while we're still trying to build at the same time that we're growing. And it's a very daunting experience.
You do keep talking about the past in that interview, and you say that you're looking to go back to all the, Alberta was once booming province. But what's your vision of the future? What do you dream about as far as the future goes?
Well, I dream about, and I literally do dream about this, because I think our leaders should dream. Actually, we should set the strategic direction about what we believe we can be and what we can achieve. A big part of that is, even if we don't get there, it's the striving to get there that moves the bar along. And that's really what we're achieving along the way. Is we might not ever reach that goal, but as long as we're working towards it, then we're making progress. And that's part of leadership as well. So that being said, I see the big idea for Alberta is to use our natural heritage, these natural resources, to figure out how we can do the 21st century economy. Like I said earlier, how we can use our energy resources to develop alternate energy solutions. how we can better utilize the wood fiber that's on our land. We've seen what's happened in British Columbia with the mountain pine beetle, for example.
It's hitting Alberta too.
It is in Alberta.
It
has hit Alberta, and there's been studies commissioned and reports presented. And the lessons that we've learned from British Columbia, being a forest-based community, is that you have to have an understanding of the strategic direction you're going to go in. If the beetle explodes in its population like it did there, then the question becomes, what do you do next? And now is the time to think about it, not while we're in the middle of a downturn. The worst time to do economic development is when you're down. That's when we always do it because you're looking for an answer. The best time to do it is when times are booming. And that's also the least popular time to do it because everybody's working and everybody's happy. So my Alberta, in my vision, is about attracting the best and the brightest, utilizing the resources we have so that every child can get a publicly delivered education to the level that they wish to achieve. And it's not a financial detriment to the family. I believe that we can do healthcare research. We can do bioenergy research better than anybody in the world if we decide to point our vision in that direction. And that's a responsibility that Alberta should be willing to accept.
But there's too much competition for human resources out there, you know. And there, even as far as energy goes, you have neighboring provinces attracting a lot of our people,
That's
a lot
right.
of the people who are working in the oil sand. How would you keep that going? I mean, how would you retain people, minus the fact that we are the province that pays the maximum, whether it's teachers or whether it's doctors. It's a well-known fact that, you know, neighboring provinces are losing their professionals to Alberta.
That's
how
right.
would you do it?
Well, I think, again, it gets back to, quite frankly, what attracts people to a place to live isn't just about their tax regime. Right now, we seem to have a focus that it's all about the lowest taxes. It's truly not. People want to exercise their abilities and exercise their skills and achieve what they have a desire and a want to achieve through their training and through their education and through what it is they see the world taking shape. So it's about how do we encourage the creativity and how do we nourish the creativity of the citizens that choose to come to this province. And again, I've had some practical experience of this. It's people today, in my opinion, they're not necessarily looking to be with the same employer for the rest of their life, get their golden watch at age 65. They'll have many careers through their life. What they're looking for is how does that job align with their number one priority, which is their family? And how can they get to there to have their children put on the school bus in time so that they can be home when they get home? And how can they achieve the outcome expected at work, not just the throughput? And we can have those discussions in attracting people to come to Alberta because it's the quality of life, it's the creativity to exercise your abilities, and it's the freedom from want. That it's a safe society where you can get education and healthcare and look after our seniors and ensure that your ability to be the best that you can be will be fostered here, not held back. And that's more than just talking about tax regimes.
There's another question, and it's from Eddie. Which political leader do you model yourself after?
Well, I like to believe that I'm my own man. Again, my practical experience came from my very varied life. Growing up, as we'd said earlier, moving around, coming from a military family, working on the shop floor, living on my own when I was, actually I left home in grade 11 and 12 and put myself through high school. Not because I had a problem with my father, or my mother, or any of my family for that matter, but Dad had this, if you're going to live under my roof, you're going to live by my rules, and I agreed with them. So I found a different roof, and we still have a very loving relationship with my family. So I don't necessarily model myself after any political leader. I model myself about the people that I've worked with over my lifetime, the books that I've read, the people that I identify with, and I'm reluctant to say this is my style of leadership. I've got a record of leadership that I think should speak for itself to a large degree.
Are you worried that you may be, all this talk about change, it's in the air. Mm-hmm. Are you worried that if you whip that up and you actually do succeed in forming, getting into the helm of affairs, then you may be, there may be a bit of disappointment if you don't measure up to whatever has been talked about?
Yeah. It's a heck of a bar we set for ourselves. And I think we've seen this recently down south when President Obama came out talking about his hope about what his society could be. And then reality sets in, that it's a very tough road we set for ourselves to change government. But that being said, it can't be done alone. If people think that, geez, you know, if we elect Glenn Taylor as leader of the Alberta Party, he's going to go out and solve all the problems and that's awesome. That's not how it can work. It has to be about citizens realizing that they have a responsibility. It has to be about what can I do to achieve a difference? What can I do to affect change? It's about us looking in the mirror when we're looking for solutions, not looking out the window and putting it on someone else.
So that's what's so difficult. How would you convince anybody who's asking you for salary hikes? I mean, this is something that I keep coming back to. Please pardon me for that. It's just that, for lack of a better example, how would you convince them to forsake that in the better interests of society? It's not a moralistic tone. It's not too much to ask, is it?
Well, I don't believe it is, if the facts prove it out that that's what's holding us back. And again, you and I, it seems, have different perspectives on that, because I don't believe that's what's really happening. When we're talking about a deficit in the province of Alberta, I believe what we're really talking about here is projections in a budget that weren't quite achieved, and we're showing the deficit there. That's a political statement. The Auditor General statement that says we have $60 billion or $40 billion in savings, we have no debt, we have discussions in our province today about why aren't we including the value of the assets that we spent the money on during that $4 billion deficit? Those are real. In my home, when I build a garage, yes, it cost me X thousands of dollars, but I've got a garage. So that's an asset.
But the assets have to be. But the assets have to be producing some kind of a return on, you know, what you've invested.
Yes.
For instance, you can park your car in that garage.
That's right.
But for the ordinary citizen, would that mean jobs? Because we're talking about construction and construction boom, but these are all booms. We're all the time riding on these booms.
That's right.
Construction boom, oil boom.
Yeah, it can't be based on the cyclical boom of an economy. There's got to be a strategy that we can move forward and plan on what we're going to do with the resources when they come in and get a little more stable in our economy.
I must ask you this. I've been thinking about it. How much of the NDP does the former NDP candidate, Glenn Taylor, bring with him to the Alberta Party?
How much of my experience in 1997?
You were...
Yeah, in 1997, this is right after I came out of that event that I was telling you about with the men that were dying of asbestos in the mill. And I ran as a provincial candidate for the New Democrats. I definitely wasn't ready then. But I also believe that you learn by losing. And without that experience, I wouldn't be the mayor in Hinton today, and I certainly wouldn't be ready to lead the Alberta Party today if I hadn't had the experience of what it takes to lead on a provincial level. And I definitely wasn't ready then. I certainly bring the experience of working together for common purpose and common interest. That's also what I brought to my municipal government. One of the reasons that I don't identify with the New Democrat Party anymore is, one, I believe that the New Democrat Party has actually become very much defined by the people that have joined that party, and it's not where I find my values anymore. I couldn't find a home in a provincial party in Alberta. I didn't align with the PCs or the Wild Rose, the New Democrats, or the Liberals, which is one of the reasons I'm willing to work to build a new political movement in the province of Alberta, because I think, again, you bring those experiences, you bring the experience of being the vice president of Western Canada Fire and First Aid. You bring the experience of having worked on a shop floor. You bring the experience of having served in government before. You mix this all together, and we're coming out with a pretty vast amount of experience. But what I have learned is that one of the things that I believe my leadership can bring is that we'll raise the level of debate in the province of Alberta. Again, moving past ideology, moving on to ideas.
And too often, government and politicians think that they have all the answers. Well, we don't. You alluded to this earlier.
This is what I've said, yes.
But what is it that the politician can do?
Well, we can get the right people in the right room and not be afraid to hear what they have to say. Too often, people are looking for an elected representative to solve all their problems. It's not the way it works, actually, especially in our representative democracy. our responsibility primarily as an elected representative is to make sure that your voice is heard and that you're given consideration when we're making decisions that are going to impact and affect you. If you're looking to elect somebody that's going to be the magic bullet solution to solve all the problems and concerns, then I don't believe you understand your responsibility in a democratic society. So, what politicians and elected representatives should do is make sure that you've got that safe environment so that we can hear from the citizens. And this is one of the things that I really like about the Alberta Party policy position on MLAs. An MLA in the Alberta Party is going to be allowed to vote against the party without fear of being tossed out of the party for speaking up. Now, that means that you have to also, though, have a clear connection between your citizens, the discussions that you've had with the citizens that elected you to represent their interest in the legislature. And if you can show that, then speak against your government, speak against your party, and vote, except in two key areas. If we make a campaign promise, you'd better support that if we're elected. That's an expectation that we went out and told the citizens of this province we'd do. And also in the area of confidence, which could bring down the government if we put together a budget. Now, a couple of key things that really attract me about the Alberta Party. First off, how do you arrive at the budget? You start with a more open and accountable process earlier in the system so that if you've got some challenges, people know what they are and you're speaking to those. And the other thing is what you do with a constituency association. And for those that don't know, a constituency association is how you have to work within the political system here in Alberta. In order to get elected, you must be nominated at a local level. You have to register as a party with Elections Alberta, and you have to go through the mechanics of all this. But what traditionally happens is a constituency association comes together every 4 years, or every 3-4 years. They get together to find a candidate, raise a bunch of money, try and get this person elected, and then they go back to sleep again. What we're trying to do is that the constituency association needs to be the voice and the ears of the MLA to the citizens in the riding so that that MLA can take that perspective into government. So it's going to be a lot more work to be an Alberta Party constituency member because we're going to be asking you questions and you'll have a responsibility to ensure that the MLA understands your perspective to bring to the legislature. So that's doing governance differently, and it's respecting the voice of the citizens.
Thank you so much for being here with us, and we wish you all the best and hope to see you again. That's all from Alberta Live. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Sunita. It was a real pleasure, and I appreciate the time we've spent together.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
My pleasure.